Hey folks, another one of those random informational videos that I like to shoot. These are always handy both for our people in-house to know how to run the equipment safely, as well as for the public for general information and learning curve. Often it's hard to figure out how to run some of this equipment, especially the older stuff, because if you haven't actually worked for a company that ran the stuff, often their in-house training videos aren't available. So it's often a nice refresher or a nice opportunity to learn certain things about equipment that a lot of companies don't publish or make available to the public. Now you see these two fork trucks are both Clark. The big guy has about an 8,000 or 8,500 pound lifting limit. The little one is about 4,000 pound lifting limit. They honestly run very, very similar as far as how their controls work. But obviously when you get into industrial equipment, even if these things came off the line side by side and were identical pieces of equipment, the life that they've lived in industry is going to cause for major changes in how they operate. So never expect one piece of equipment to run exactly like another one did, even if they're the exact same year of machine and model, because wear and tear on the machinery can cause for quirks in how it operates. The brakes will be different, the clutch will be different, the hydraulics will operate different or might be choppy, or you go to lower the mast on a very controlled idea and the thing drops 18 or 20 inches. Not a big deal if you're out in the middle of nowhere with no load on, but if you had somebody ducking under to take a load chain off and you're expecting the mast to drop 18 inches and it drops 40 inches instead, you just killed somebody. So if you're not familiar with the machine, make sure that nobody else is anywhere near you. And take some time to run the machine a bit slow and careful and get a feel for it before you let anybody else come anywhere near you while you're running the machine. That's just always a good habit to get into, because unfortunately when you get into industrial equipment like this, there usually is not a oops, I cut my finger event. It's oops, I removed somebody's leg, or I stuck the forks through the side of their truck, or it's usually when something goes wrong, it goes catastrophically wrong, not just, like I say, oops, I broke a fingernail kind of thing. So this equipment is very, very useful, saves a lot of labor, saves a lot of injury when used correctly, but when used wrong, things go horribly wrong. There's your safety warning on it. Always make sure that the equipment's in good working order also, because this stuff gets used hard, and often things will go wrong on, let's say, the morning shift will damage a tire, or the brakes will go out or something, and they forget to mark that the machine is now unsafe for operation. So always take a few minutes to look over the equipment before you start it, to check the safety stuff. And when you do first start it, test your brakes, test your clutch before just slapping it in gear and slamming the throttle to the floor and going for a ride. Because when you're going down a load ramp or a loading ramp with a 4,000 pound pallet heading into a trailer or out into the street, it's a little late to figure out you don't have brakes. So always take time to get a feel for the machine. If you weren't the last one to start it, park it, and run it, especially, make sure you take time to check the brakes, check the clutch, make sure that all of the operating systems are working as they are supposed to before you ever put the thing in gear and move it. Just good habits to get into. Anyways, all right. So both of these are telescopic mast machines, meaning that they've got a multiple stage to their mast. So while this machine only sits a little over 6.5 feet tall, it could actually shove this pallet carriage through the ceiling. This one, I believe, lifts to a little over 14 foot tall, and I've got 12-foot ceilings in here. So if you're not watching what you're doing when you raise that mast, you could put it or your load through the ceiling pretty easy. The bigger one here has only a 2-stage mast, and it can lift high enough to put stuff on a 8-foot or 9-foot tall shelf. So it will put stuff up on the shelf here, which is a 9-foot shelf. But now we've got to watch our ceiling clearances when you're lifting that high, because as you can see, the top of the forks on this particular one are about 30 inches tall, and my ceiling clearance to get into that pallet is less than 30 inches. So if I were to try to go after that top pallet with that machine, my forks would be into the sheetrock of the ceiling before I could ever get to that. And it's often because you're right above your head, because the operator position sits so far forward on these, it's often hard to actually see where your forks are or where the top of your forks are when you're coming into a load. So it's often beneficial to take a quick look at the math of what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to go into, let's say, the back of a cube van that pulled up to your loading dock, and it happens to be a low clearance cube van for running around the city, and it only has 7-foot clearance, and this machine, because of the hoses sticking up there, might need 7'3". You try and go into the back of that cube van, you're going to have a problem. So it's good to assess the math of the situation that you are trying to accomplish before getting on the machine. Now, it's also important to figure out what you're trying to do. So as you see, this machine here has small tires, and they're both about the same size, front and rear. And this other one has really big tires. Now, where that makes a huge difference is the big machine can go outside. It can go over rough terrain. Let's say the big guy has no problem jumping over my 2-inch or 3-inch tall ledge here to go into my saw cut bay. But the little one, because the size of that 3-inch ledge and a 12-inch tire, just about tips over going over that ledge if both tires don't hit the ledge at the same time. And it has a real hard time jumping that type of curb, or if there's a pothole or deviation in the concrete, as I've got over here. On the little guy, these 1-inch deep calluses in my concrete cause that machine to wobble and shake quite a bit. Now, when my load is only 8 inches off the ground, that's no big deal. But let's say I used the little one to place my air handling system up here, which is a 3,000-pound air conditioning unit, and I had no choice but to use the little one because of where I was at. And when I put that 4 feet or 5 feet in the air and then hit this rough concrete, that was a scary ride. So in that case, because I'm going over rough terrain, that's what the bigger tires are intended for, is rough terrain. So anytime that I'm running anything between my two buildings, I use the big one because it's intended for off-road use. It also has foam-filled tires, which have a little bit of give to them, whereas this one is solid rubber tires. When you hit even just the lines in the concrete or a manhole cover that's even at terrain, that 1/4-inch deviation in the terrain on these solid tires is a backbreaker. It hurts like hell, and the machine shakes all over the place. With the bigger one, yeah, and the bigger cracks, it'll hit hard, but it can handle it. It's designed for it. It can also go off-road or on gravel to a point. But obviously, because this thing can lift 8,000 pounds, this back half of your forklift is a counterweight. And so because that big one can lift 8,000 pounds, this counterweight that's hanging on the back of here is probably 4,000 pounds. And that's sitting on top of a 4 or 5 inch wide tire. So if you get out into the mud, this thing is going to sink. So you don't want to go out off of the gravel or into a grassy area with that. It's just not intended for it. It's going to sink. And you're going to have a hell of a time getting that out with 4,000 pounds sitting on top of narrow tires. So that's my long-winded safety disclaimer at the beginning. Now let's get into the actual operation of them. As I said, both of these are very similar. One of the main differences you'll see between them is this one has a hydraulic cylinder, and on that particular carriage, what that does is moves the forks left to right. Now you'll see them with a hydraulic cylinder in there where it can open and close the forks width-wise as well. You can bring it down to, let's say, 10-inch wide or push it out to 46-inch wide. In this case, it's called a side shift. It moves the full carriage left to right, which is handy when you're stacking pallets on a shelf because you can keep maybe 10 inches clearance from your side beam when you come in and then shift it over closer to your side beam. Rather than having to move the machine left to right, you can just move the forks left to right. This one, on the other hand, has no such device. It does not have the hydraulics that move the forks side to side, and the forks are completely manual to move. Moving the forks on these rails is a complete bear because the forks themselves weigh about 300 pounds. To do so, you lift the carriage in the air about a foot off the ground and then move the heel over and then move the top while unlocking these toggles. And it is very labor intensive. I would film that, but obviously I'm in the shop by myself today, so I don't have anybody else to hold the camera while I do so. You'll notice second hydraulics that we're going to show you on this is this cylinder here that tips the mast forward to back, so you can change the pitch a bit, which primarily is about changing the pitch of your forks. So as you see right now, the tips are elevated a little bit and the heel is down. You can tip this so that the forks tips are touching and the heel would be elevated about 3 or 4 inches on this one, or vice versa. So the tip is about 5 inches in the air and the heel is still touching. It's very handy when you go to pick stuff off of a shelf again, because if the back of the pallet is heavier than the front, as you lift, the tips would go down and your front would be elevated and you might have trouble clearing this crossbar. So by changing the pitch of your load, you can keep clearance on your crossbar. It's also handy like when you're going down a ramp, as we've got outside of our shop here, we've got a very steep ramp. When you are going down a ramp, you always want to go down backward because you've got this heavy counterweight. If you went down forward, your forks are coming down first. If you're carrying a load and you're going down forward, the load is going to fall away from the mast, and then your counterweight is going to push you into your load. And let's say outside here, we're actually driving out into a street. If I was going down forks first and the brakes went out and there was a car there, my forks are going to go through the car when it impacts. And so you've got a runaway machine going down a ramp, forks first, somebody's getting hurt. If you're going down backward, yeah, it sucks, you ran into the car, but you ran into the car with the blunt end of the machine. So it put a dent in the car, pushed the car a couple of feet over, did a couple $1,000 damage, but most likely nobody got killed. So going down backward is important both for load stability, because if your load does spill, it's spilling into your backrest here, and the forks aren't coming first into a vehicle or a person if it's out there. So always back down your ramps. Back to operations. All right, so you got a propane tank on these things. Always turn the gas off when you get off the machine, turn it on when you're getting on the machine. Even if you're just walking away for 5 or 10 minutes, turn it off, because a lot of times these regulators will bleed when the machine is sitting and not running. So anytime you're getting off the machine for more than 3 or 4 minutes, turn the gas off. It's just a good habit to get in. So on is counterclockwise, off is clockwise. You do not need to open the valve all the way. I typically go 1 full turn. A lot of people like to just go a quarter turn, because the idea being if it blew a hose, with it being quarter turn, you could just quarter turn it and turn it off before it sprays propane all over the place. A lot of our bottles are older, so they require 1 full turn in order to get enough flow for the machine to actually run. So it's just an accommodation because of more aged equipment and valves. On the machine, you will see 3 pedals. On this particular one, just like a car, you got a gas pedal and a brake pedal. And then on the left here, we've got a clutch pedal. On this machine, it's a true clutch and brake and gas pedal, just like a pickup truck or a car would be. Now, the unique thing about this is actually an automatic transmission in here. So you've got a clutch with an automatic transmission. This pedal also is clutch for the first 2/3, and if you push it hard, it also applies the brake slightly. So you can just use the clutch, or you can just use the brake. Just like an automatic, you can just ride the brake and use the torque converter to allow you to creep forward with some torque still against your driveline. Then we've got a up and down, and a tip back, tip forward, and an emergency brake. On the other machine over here, it's very similar but completely different. So on this machine, we've got the gas pedal, we've got a brake, and you'll notice the brake and the clutch move together. So on this one, when you hit either pedal, it both disengages the torque converter and hits the brakes. I don't like this setup personally because you can't just creep forward with a little bit of power against your driveline. But this is intended more as a flat surface truck. It's not intended for going out into the street and such where you might need a little more power while still loading. And then we've got our automatic transmission, forward and reverse. And we've got 3 controls on this one. So tip forward, tip back, or excuse me, down and up, tip forward, tip back, and then this is your side shift. Now you'll notice this one only has 1 control, forward and back. This is a single speed machine. It does not have high and low range. This one has 2 levers. You've got your forward and back, and then you've got high gear, low gear, and if you pull it all the way down, you've got creep. So this has got a 3-speed transmission in it, and you very rarely use creep unless you're going onto a truck with a very heavy load, or if you're working on a hill or something. I pretty well just leave it in low unless I'm running stuff between the buildings. Low speed is up to about 3 miles an hour. High speed, you can get about 8 miles an hour. If you hit a crack in the street or a 1.5-inch diameter rock in high range with this thing, it's a backbreaker. Even with the foam-filled tires, it rides really rough. But other than that, like I say, they operate very similar. They both have power steering. With these, they are capable of turning the tires to a complete 90 degree to the machine. What happens on older machines is the stops on the tires that are supposed to stop them from camming over occasionally get worn, as is the case with our bigger one here. If you turn it to a full 90 degree so that the tire is sticking all the way out the side, sometimes it doesn't come back. It will cam lock. So try to avoid turning your steering to 90 degrees unless you know the machine really well, because it's probably 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 5 machines that's been used for outdoor use. They will cam lock when you turn them too hard. So a lot of people, you see it in cars all the time too. People turn the steering until the power steering pump is squealing at you, and you're going to end up with the thing with a problem, especially out in the dirt. Anyways, starting it has an electric choke, so it will start by just giving the foot pedal a couple of touches to set the choke and start it. Obviously, it's not going to start quite as easy when you are outside and when it's cold. This is your lift, and I'll show you that telescope. Notice how the carriage is going up and the mast is going up. And now we want to watch that ceiling, because as I said, the mast is still fairly far away from our ceiling, but notice what you see in the camera is what I'm seeing. You can't really tell where you're at with that carriage, but those forks are almost hitting the sheetrock right now. So So you got to be very careful with that. And what will happen occasionally on these older machines, and it happens on these guys all the time, when you've got a lot of weight on your carriage, the sequence will get out. So right now, the carriage is traveling up at the same time as the mast, as it's supposed to. But if you get a lot of weight on here, that mast will go up before the carriage raises. And what ends up happening is that mast can hit the sheetrock, because you're watching your load go up and not the top of your mast. And you can put the mast through the sheetrock because it's sequenced wrong. It's really a common problem on older machines because everything gets a little bit of a drag to it. But anyways, as I said, this is your tip back. And as we can see, it's got quite a bit of tip back and tip forward. So it's kind of hard to see from my point of view here. But when you're traveling with the load, you want to pick up your load so that you've got maybe 4 or 5 inches of clearance under it, but never travel with the load any higher than it needs to be. Now obviously when we're backing down the ramp over here, because our ramp is about a 24-inch drop, we've got to tip our load backward a bit, and we need about a foot of clearance or so, and enough clearance to deal with the ramp when we come down on the flat surface, so we don't rip the ramp or rip our load apart on the ramp. But when you're traveling with the load or when you're traveling without a load, those forks should only be maybe 6 inches off the ground. And this is really important when you're traveling out on the street with this. You'll see people running around all the time with their bucket or their forks or whatever at 3 or 4 feet high. And what happens is if a pedestrian were coming off the sidewalk or a car cuts you off, those forks go right through the window at personal height, and somebody gets severely injured. If you're traveling with those forks only 4, maybe 6 inches off the ground, yeah, okay, it damaged the car. Once again, you ended up under the drive line of the car, but it's under the level of their seat, and nobody got killed. So it's an unfortunate event that you skewered a car, but it's a heck of a lot better than the alternative if you were sitting 18 or 20 inches high and you hit a Nissan of some sort. Like I say, when stuff goes wrong with these, it goes horribly wrong. So always be very, very careful and very, very deliberate. When you shut the machine off, you can just turn off the key and it will turn itself off. Always make sure you set the parking brake before you exit the machine. And then, as I said, turn your gas off before you walk away from the machine. That way you don't end up with some bleed off. Now, that being said, older machines will vent a bit because you've still got the pressure in the hoses and in the intake manifold on this. So a lot of machines, you will smell propane from them for an hour, maybe 2 hours after they have shut down because they bleed off a little bit once you shut the valve off. It's just perpetual problem with older machinery that it's going to breathe a bit like that. These are water-cooled machines, so you need to make sure that they have coolant in them, that they have oil. That's all part of your maintenance plan, obviously, because it is just basically a car engine and car transmission in there. You got to keep up on your fluids and such, but that should all be part of your maintenance person. Hope this video is useful to everybody. Thank you for watching. I know it got a little long-winded here at 23 minutes, but I think there's a lot of good information in here for you. Thanks for watching.